of the Department of African American Studies at Wayne State University. We are excited to have our second event in our George Floyd in America series. George Floyd was killed publicly 2 months ago, and it was heartbreaking to witness his killing or to see a video of it. His death has sparked something in America and here at Wayne State University. We are excited to be grappling with issues related to policing in America, but also life in America and the world. And so today we are going to talk about questioning the role of the police. My co-moderator is law professor and director of the Damon Keefe Center, Peter Hammer. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the Wayne State University faculty, staff, students, and alum who have come together to make this happen and to make the world a better place in a world. We're serious. This is serious. We have two great speakers today who have Wayne State connections. We've asked them to speak for 15 minutes or so, and then we will open up to questions and comments from our audience. The first speaker is Eric Williams. The second speaker is PG Watkins. I am going to read their brief bios because I've been told that I have a tendency to ramble. So I'm going to try to stay on point today. Eric C. Williams is a senior staff attorney for the Economic Equity Practice of Detroit Justice Center, a nonprofit dedicated to addressing the impact and legacy of mass incarceration on returning citizens, their families, and communities. EEP supports grassroots solutions to systemic barriers to safe, vibrant communities in Detroit, addressing issues such as affordable housing, entrepreneurship, and public safety. Eric previously served as the director of Wayne State University's Law School's Business and Community Law Clinic, as well as the director of the Wayne Law Program for Entrepreneurship and Business Law. His prior experience includes private practice in the New York offices of Nixon Peabody, LLP, and Winston and Strawn, LLP. Eric's going to be our first speaker. Our second speaker, I'm going to do the introductions now so we can flow, is PG Watkins. They, them is a non-binary organizer, facilitator, and organizational strategist from Detroit. PG believes that organizing and storytelling are interconnected and is committed to using both mediums to shift dominant oppressive narratives and change the material conditions of Black people in Detroit and beyond. They are the co-founder and director of Black Bottom Archives, a community media platform dedicated to cultivating the development and preservation of media created by Black Detroiters for the sake of amplifying our voices, archiving our histories, and documenting our present realities and transforming narratives about our city. PG is an abolitionist who believes that a world is possible beyond jails, detention, and punitive punishment, and advances these beliefs through organizing locally as a co-founder of the Black Youth Project 100 Detroit chapter and as a board member of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center to nurture community leadership. I will also say that PG is one of my former students. She was one of my best students, and it's always a humbling experience when at the end of the semester, you, the professor, question whether you learned more than this particular student. So welcome again, and we are ready to begin. Eric, thank you.
So thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you, Peter, for asking me to be here. And of course, it's always great to be involved in anything that involves PG. So we're talking today, at least the talk today is centered around the murder of George Floyd. And it seems like a very seminal moment. And I think the reason it feels this way is, well, first of all, the way it happened and was captured emphasized the humanity of the person being killed, right? And that touched everybody, the cry for his mother, just the callousness of the officers. But I think another reason is it was a repudiation of everything we've been told we need to do to reform the police. It didn't involve discharge of a firearm. The officers had been trained. In fact, Chauvin was a trainer. There were cameras aplenty, not only the officers' body cams, but also the cameras of bystanders. It was not, it did not involve simply white officers, right? So all the things that we have been taught to believe would be the remedy to this kind of tragedy, well, a lot of them were in fact in place, but nevertheless, George Floyd is dead. Which I think has all of us thinking, clearly there is something else at issue here. I think that what's emerged is a call to re-examine what we expect of the police, which in turn requires us to re-examine what we give to the police in terms of public resources, in terms of essentially the benefit of the doubt when we're talking about police officers being charged, when we talk about police officers being believed on the stand. A lot of the most basic assumptions we've made about the way the police operate, the way law enforcement relates to us, have been challenged by what we all saw. And and the video, of course, leaves no room for doubt. One of the biggest things that has come out of this is a large clamoring to defund the police, to abolish the police. And I think that's a conversation worth having, but it's a very difficult conversation to have when the first thing that jumps to people's minds, and minds of many people, both conservatives, progressives, is the notion that we're talking about suddenly tomorrow there will be no such thing as law enforcement. And it's difficult for people to even begin thinking about that as a remedy when they feel like, oh, there's so much else we haven't tried. And right now, what you're hearing are a lot of old proposals being advanced. For example, people are suddenly talking about, again, the residency requirement, which was eliminated here in Michigan back in 99, 2000 or so, which has been gone from Michigan for quite some time, reinstituting that, insisting on additional transparency, these kind of things. And I think we should recognize that those kind of remedies have been either tried before or and failed, or have absolutely no chance of succeeding. I don't think it would have mattered in the instance of George Floyd if Chauvin had lived around the corner from him. That wasn't going to be the issue. In fact, there's, they probably had interacted previously. So it's a matter of looking at the institution of policing, not just how institution of policing relates to the community, but what we think of as policing. So, and if, pardon me, I want to make sure I have my timer on, right? So I want to walk people through sort of the thought that go along with abolition, right? Which I think is probably where we should be headed, and certainly what a lot of protesters are calling for. And abolition, right, is the abolishment of the institution we currently call the police should be something that we all want in the end. We should all want a society where we don't have armed individuals who are not only armed with guns, but also the power of the state to be first responders to homelessness or mental health episodes or drug abuse, right? We want a society where that isn't the first thing, that isn't what the law in terms of law enforcement is responding to, right? So that's the very first point we ought to make. We should be thinking about changing society so that that isn't what happens. And in a lot of respects, that's a fairly easy fix, right? It's not that novel. It's been done in a lot of places. I think probably the next thing we need to think about is that is think about how we position police now. Not only do they have too broad a scope of responsibility, but they consume way too much of our public resources that are devoted to public safety. And remember, ultimately, that's what we're talking about, right? Law enforcement is not synonymous with public safety. At best, law enforcement is an aspect of public safety. It's certainly not the end all and be all of public safety. So when you start thinking about where to invest in public safety, we take away a lot of the responsibilities that we currently place on police officers. When you think about that, then you start thinking about, well, where do we make investments in? And everybody just sort of, it springs to mind. It's not difficult to think about where you start making new public investment. It's in education, it's in mental health services, it's in services for substance abuse and homelessness and education. I mean, these just sort of flow off the tongue. I think we all recognize that that's where we need to be making public investment. And I think it's clear that those parts of the government should have a senior claim on public resources, right? And if you look at the way our government operates here in Detroit, $294 million went from the general fund to police compared to say 9 million on health, right? It's true that in Detroit, a quarter of the annual budget virtually every year has gone to one single aspect of public safety. And I think we have to recognize that that's the discussion we need to be having. If ultimately budgets are moral documents, they are a reflection of our priorities, they are a reflection of the things that we think are important, then we have to make sure that the numbers match up with what we claim our values are. And that means taking away money from somewhere and putting it to those other things. And the most obvious place is taking it from the police department. I think that the next step we need to consider as we move toward what I believe is ultimately an abolitionist society. And by abolitionist, I mean that the institution that we call the police has no place in such a society. The next thing we have to be thinking about is that currently the police as an institution is designed in a way that makes it impossible for it to generate the kind of safety that we really want. Everybody seems to harp on the bad apple theory, the theory that the problems we have are the result of bad apples. And I think everybody can agree that there are certainly bad apples, keeping in mind that sort of bad apple that spoils the bunch is actually the same, right? I think everybody can agree that there are bad apples, and bad apples don't include those who commit violence against communities, but also those who stand idly by. But the very nature of police operations create a really untenable situation where the police are sent, how the laws are enforced. It all just doubles down on existing inequities when it comes to arrest, charging, searches, convictions, sentencing. All those existing inequities in our criminal justice system are multiplied by the way the police choose to exercise their discretion. Everything from, the way how often Black folks get stopped, to how often they get searched, to where, as a matter of fact, you find the most police officers. And if you'll notice, there's almost an inverse correlation between community public safety, and law enforcement. You see fewer law enforcement officers in those communities that are safest, right? So when you really begin looking at it, what you can't help but conclude is that law enforcement as it currently exists, policing as it currently exists, is, how can we say this? It is expensive. It does not address the factors that are most obvious when it comes to creating public safety. It's a drain on public resources. It reinforces the worst aspects of discrimination in American society, and in fact has not made us safer. If you look at crime rates and the number of police officers across the country, what you'll notice, to the extent there's any correlation at all, it's an inverse correlation. So what we have is fundamentally broken. Many of the reforms that are being proposed right now are in fact kind of a distraction. If we've established that the system is broken, then spending money for piecemeal reforms that have already been shown to be inadequate seems absurd to me. So where we are now is sort of a unique inflection point. We had the very public and sort of inexcusable murder of George Floyd. And as a society, we should use that as a jumping point to analyze not just what went wrong in that particular set of circumstances, but what is so wrong with the system that those circumstances existed in the first place. And that's where we are. And I think probably the greatest tribute we could do to the memory of George Floyd is not let this moment pass us without creating some fundamental change. And I think ultimately that change will abolish the institution that currently serves as the police. And it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but I think we are ignoring the opportunity we have, and we are almost dismissing the sacrifice George Floyd made if we don't begin working toward that society. Thank you.
Paige, you can go when you're ready.
Oh, okay, cool. Yes, I'll just jump in. So yeah, hello, I'm PG. I use they, them pronouns, and yeah, I asked what I should talk about during this 15 minutes, and Peter said, "Speak from the heart," and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to talk a bit about why I call myself an abolitionist and the type of work that we're doing in terms of questioning the police and the role of policing in our societies. So I guess I'll start off by saying that I helped to co-found the Black Youth Project 100, BYP 100 chapter here in Detroit in 2015. And BYP 100 is a national organization for 18 to 35-year-old Black people who are trying to be activists and organizers. And our organization is inherently an abolitionist and anti-capitalist organization, which, I mean, has its contradictions as, like, you know, we're a nonprofit organization. And so all the ways that we're moving through what it means to be practicing abolition, what it means to be practicing anti-capitalism is very present in our organizing. But for the last 5 years, and I mean, and beyond that, we have been saying divest from the police. We have been calling for the divestment from the police, from city budgets, from county and state budgets, and from the federal budgets as well. A divestment and ultimately the abolition of policing in the way that we know it. And so I think it's just important to name that context, because in this really heightened moment of uprising that we're experiencing and that we've been experiencing for the past 60 days, it's really easy for folks who have not been a part of this organizing to name this as some type of new concept, something that young radicals just made up, and they're just causing all types of chaos with this idea. And we haven't thought it through. There's no strategy, right? Like, these are the things that I hear about folks who are on the ground every day. And I'm here to say that, no, there is a strategy. We have talked this through. We've been thinking about this for a long time. And even before, you know, the 5 years that I've been in this organization, Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, all these other prolific Black people, Black women, scholars, have been talking about abolition for decades. This has been something that folks have been studying and pushing and struggling with for a very long time. And so I just want to kind of debunk that myth that this is a new conversation, that this isn't a well thought out argument, that when we say defund the police, we don't know what we're getting ourselves into. The other part of that that's important to say is, when we talk about abolition, we're talking about abolition of the entire system and industry of policing. We're not just talking about the police officers that are on the street. We're saying, yes, we want less police officers and ultimately no police officers. And we want no surveillance. And we want no detention and incarceration. And we want no prosecution, because ultimately prosecution is also a part of this machine of the prison industrial complex, right? And so we understand that what we're pushing for as abolitionists is big. And I think Eric said it already, like, nobody is saying it's going to happen tomorrow. Nobody's calling for all police departments everywhere to be defunded right now. We know that it's going to take a very well thought out strategy and a lot of practice in our communities in order to do that. When I think about how we're questioning the role of police in our communities, I also always think about, how are we policing each other? How do we act like the police to our people? What are the ways that we're encouraging and reinforcing the ideas of the prison industrial complex through our actions and in our relationships? And all of that stuff has to be unlearned too. We can't say defund the police and then still be out here treating each other like cops, or doing violence against each other, or trying to hurt and harm each other. So how do we stop that? How do we stop that type of criminality or that type of harm and violence? The solution is divesting from the models of harm that we're seeing and investing in community resources. Eric spoke to this a bit already. Like, what are the ways that we're investing into schools? What are the ways that we're investing in mental health resources? And not just mental health facilities and hospitals that also act like cages for people, that also act like prisons for people, but really ways that folks can acknowledge and address and move through mental health in all the ways that that looks like, in the ways that is right for them. What does it mean to invest more in parks and recreation? Parks and Recreation in the city of Detroit gets like a percentage, a very like maybe 1% or some other single digit percent of the budget in comparison to the police department, right? And what does that mean if youth and families don't have a place to be, that they can just be and be together without having to do some stuff that folks might call illegal in order to be together? So yeah, I just think it's super important when we talk about abolition that we talk about all of it. Like, there are a lot of ways that folks try to discredit the radical argument of abolition by saying that we're not thinking about all this stuff. And so I just wanted to name, like, yes, these are all the things that we're considering when we call abolition a strategy and a daily practice. So it's something that we're moving towards. And every day as an abolitionist, I have to ask myself, what can I do differently? How am I transforming myself? How am I working to transform my relationships to my community? So that I don't ever feel like I have to call the cops, so that I don't ever feel like I have to police my people or encourage the policing of my people. The other thing I think is important to name in this moment, as we talk about the horrific death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and all these other folks who we've lost most recently to police violence, just wanting to also amplify and uplift the lives of Black women and girls that we've lost, Black trans people that have been killed. And not always, and I think when we talk about the deaths and killings of Black women, Black girls, Black trans and cis women, Black children, Black gender non-binary people, sometimes we only want to talk about the police stuff, right? And that's also another moment where it's like, no, we actually need to address all the ways that our communities are causing violence against these same marginalized groups, and how community violence is also deeply impactful in a lot of the same ways that state violence is impacting our folks. So like recently here, right outside of Detroit in Harper Woods, just a month ago, I think, Priscilla Slater, a Black woman who is from Detroit, was in Harper Woods, was arrested and was in police custody and was found dead in police custody in the jail in Harper Woods. And I believe it was a month ago. Time has been so weird. I just don't have any sense of it right now. So it might have been a month ago, might have been a little longer than that. But she died in police custody right outside of the city. And still to this day, Harper Woods mayor and police department are refusing to share any information about what caused her death, how did she die, why was she in police custody in the first place, which is a question her family has. So, I mean, we often want to talk about these issues as if they're happening somewhere else, right? Like as if, wow, look at that tragedy that happened in Minneapolis, look at that tragedy that happened in New York. But in Detroit, we are dealing with police violence every single day. In the last 3 weeks, Detroit police has killed 2 people and shot another person who thankfully is not dead. But they were also still involved in a police shooting. And this is happening. The Detroit police killed 2 people in the last 3 weeks in the midst of a global uprising against the police. In a time where you would think, wow, they really should be trying to do something other than kill people, right? Like there are so many other ways to respond to a call than to kill them. And yet here they are continuing to prove us right, that they don't know how to be anything but violent and racist, that they don't know how to be anything but harmful to our communities. It's just the way that they're indoctrinated. And so I think a conversation I like to be in with folks, particularly Black people in Detroit, but all people anywhere really, is the ways that we try to think about, I think what Eric brought up about bad apples, good police, bad cops, whatever. And the reality that the whole system is messed up. The whole system from its beginning has been about the protection of property over people. It's been about policing Black bodies, Black people, Black communities, and making sure that they are not out of line, whatever that looks like. The war on drugs has been this hyper excessive way of criminalizing Black people, criminalizing poverty, and then using that criminalization to justify their death or justify the violence that the state does against them. And to that, we all, like all the abolitionists everywhere, are saying no more of that. We demand more of you. We demand more of our people. We demand more of our city governments. We demand that you prioritize and put value on our lives. And one one way you can decide to do that is by decreasing the amount of money that you give to the police, not allowing them to have military equipment, not allowing them to, not giving them justifiable cause to shoot and kill people, right? Like these little ways that I think we can change our relationships to that. So yes, I started working against the police and was very activated by the shootings of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, and really am still in this work and committed to being in this work for the long haul because I believe that something else is possible. And it's, yes, I'm fighting against the police, and I'll any day to anybody, I'll talk about why we don't need the police. I will, you know what I mean? I'm ready for that argument all the time. I'm ready to, Eric knows I'm trying to convert everybody into abolition. I'm trying to make everybody understand that something else is possible. And it's because of something I know very deeply, is that something else is possible. There's something beyond this that we might not be able to fully imagine yet, right? Like the way I'm visioning it might not actually be the way it comes, because it's going to have to be something completely new, but it's possible, right? Like transformation is possible. Transformation of people and of our societies are possible. And it's like, how committed are you to that work? How committed are you to changing? How committed are you to changing yourself, to changing the way you move with your family, to changing the way you move with people on your block, and ultimately changing the way that we treat each other across community? I do believe that that's the work. Like we talk about questioning the role of police in our societies and our communities. We also have to be questioning ourselves and like, what is our role in our communities to keep each other safe, to look out for each other, to make sure that we have each other's backs, and that folks are held accountable. Not to say that, and that's the, like, I think that's maybe the last thing I'll touch on. It's just to say that when we talk about abolishing all these systems of punishment, I don't believe that harm will stop right after that, right? Like harm and violence is bound to continue because it's something that we know and it's how we have engaged so far. And until we are truly able to unlearn that out of all of our society, harm and violence is going to continue to happen. And for me, I'm like, okay, harm happens, violence happens, something that seems unforgivable has taken place. What then is the possibility of the person who committed that harm to be transformed? Are they willing to be accountable for it? Are they willing to engage in that personal transformation? And then how willing are we, as the people who are impacted by that harm or violence or that unforgivable act, to believe in their transformation as well and to commit to their transformation as well, and not just say that because they did this thing, now they deserve isolation. Because they did this thing, now they deserve to be killed or whatever. But truly actually care about people's humanity is, I think, the big struggle of this time. So yeah, I feel like that's my time, I think. And also just, yeah, down for questions and to continue being in this conversation about what it would take for us to get there.
Great. No, I just really want to thank Ollie as a co-organizer, but Eric and PG for your wonderful, thoughtful comments. I'm going to have a short question for Eric and for PG, and then I'll ask Ollie to sort of pick up and sort of imagine from the audience questions, and you can start typing them into the chat room. I'm going to ask this and ask for concise answers, even though these are huge questions that could be larger. But I alluded to in our green room discussion, Eric, that Amanda Alexander, who is the executive director of the Detroit Justice Center, called you the unlikely abolitionist. And I'd like to just sort of hear a little bit about your own personal growth and development in this field, and what was the journey that led you to the beliefs that you're holding now.
Wow. Okay. So sure. Brief answer. Right. So you have to begin, for me personally, begins with the fact that my father was a cop, right? My mother was an MP and a state trooper. So I grew up around law enforcement, and to some degree in a bubble, because here in Detroit, actually, I never had any negative interactions really with the police. It wasn't until I left Detroit that I was reminded I'm a Black man in America. But what did it for me was just the constant stream of violent deaths at the hands of the police officers. And in every single instance, you saw that reforms that people had promised, actually, some of them had been implemented, and it never changed the outcome, right? And when insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and looking for different results, when a system keeps producing the same results, at a certain point, you have to question why you're supporting that institution if it keeps producing outcomes that you find really problematic. And I happen to think the murder of people at the hands of law enforcement is really problematic. And then from there, I started looking at, it's basically a thought exercise. And I wrote about it at one point, but I did this myself. I pictured, what is a safe place? What does it look like in my head? What does a just society look in my head? And that's actually prompted by Amanda. And the image that came to me looked nothing like what for example, most major cities look like, right? My image wasn't peopled with police officers and surplus military equipment and surveillance cameras and checkpoints, right? And if my conception, if my ideal of a safe place doesn't involve police, and you can in fact see this in a lot of communities, you can actually see what I envision, then clearly there's a problem with what we have now, and we have to move away from it. Now, I am not as optimistic as Amanda, I will say. I don't know if we will ever get to the society that we should have, but I do know that whether we get there or not is less important than, as a society, we make a deliberate and sustained effort to get there, right? We have to begin by funding those things we think are important, by stopping police from doing the things that they are just not good at, right? And then ultimately taking that funding and putting it into the things that actually provide true public safety. Now, as I said, I don't know if we'll ever get there or not, but I am firmly convinced that if we have any respect for our fellow man and woman, we certainly have to make the effort.
No, thank you. And that was pretty concise. So I think we're hitting the mark here. Eric was suggesting something that leads in the question I had for you, PG, and you were mentioning parts of this, how hard it is for people even to imagine this. And I'd say in particular, how difficult it is for European Americans like myself to imagine this. And I've seen you lead, large group exercises and other things that address that point. So you just speak a little bit about how visioning is important and how you use visioning in your work to get people to start to exercise their muscle for imagination and what role that plays in your organizing and advocacy.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like I have to be hopeful and optimistic that we're going to get somewhere different, or I don't actually know that I can engage in this work the way I do. Like, I have to believe that it's going to happen. And personally, I believe it's going to happen in my lifetime. I'm like, I'm going to see, and my children will know, a world without police. And maybe it won't be a perfect world. We won't be at the place where maybe we know exactly how to do everything, but we'll get there, and then we'll continue working at it, right? So I definitely think in terms of stretching our imagination, I mean, that's one of the first things that capitalism takes from us. One of the first things that it takes from us is our ability to imagine anything different, because we're told that we need to do things a certain way, be a certain way. In school, we're told, for the people who have been, for the people who are super creative or outspoken in schools, right? Like, we're told that we can't be, that we have to stick to the rules, that we have to do things exactly as they are. We're given history in a certain way and told to process it back in a certain way, right? So I think that imagination is zapped out of us super early. And so one of the things that I do when I'm working and talking to older people, adults and older folks, not so much the youth and the children, they got it. Like, I feel like we have a couple of conversations with them and they're able to, free ice cream and pop for everybody, all that stuff. They're ready to think about what something radically different could look like. When I talk to adults, often what I'll go is similar to what Eric said in his personal reflection, is that it really is about, like, just, can you imagine what makes you feel safe? When was the last time that you felt completely safe? Was it was it with your grandmother? Was it with your family? What were you doing in that situation? What was around that created that feeling of safety? And then thinking about the conditions of that feeling of safety in that one moment, and what might it take to scale that? What might it take to have that feeling for other people in other situations? So yeah, I don't see it as like a quick conversation. It definitely is a very I think, a long process, right? Like Eric will tell you, it's over the series of many conversations, having to really unlearn what we've come to learn about what safety actually means, and unlearn what it means for criminality and all that, you know. Just all of that has to change, because all of that has to, keeping it concise, all of that has to change, and our imaginations need to be even wider than they are right now. And so we do that by practicing imagining things. Sometimes you could do self-reflective activities about just random things, you know what I mean, just to practice and stretch that muscle. But yeah, that's part of the work.
Let me congratulate you two on your presentations. I thought they were very clear, concise, provocative. When I think about the role of policing, often link that to the United States military and foreign policy. And I don't think we can reform the police without dealing with the international implications of the United States as a global policeman and woman. And so this has been a difficult question for me, because my father was in the Army, my godfather was in the Marines, all my uncles have served in the military. So I have love and affection for police and military people. But I think you two make persuasive arguments. Before we get to the question from the audience, Eric, you can answer this, or PG. Did you say that there are examples around the world or in the United States of where the police have been abolished as we know it? And so I wasn't clear on that, because you said, you know, police are fewest where safety is highest, I think referring to suburbs, but are there any countries or other larger units where the model that you're advocating already exists, or something close to it?
Well, I could say really quickly, my master's program at U of D Mercy, our thesis project was about community development to make jails obsolete. And it was a response to the county jail development, $500 million, they're building a jail right off 75 and Warren. And so we were basically trying to propose some tangible community development alternatives to that project. One of the things that we researched in our case studies was the Netherlands. So I'll say, just a direct answer to your question is, I don't know that there is an example right now that I can at least name of a place where abolition, like there is no police as we know it at all. There are places that we can use as models for decarceration, for decreasing the amount of incarcerated people, and for reduced police presence, I think is what Eric was getting to, in the ways that oftentimes in suburbs or more affluent areas, the police just are expected to do much less. And so they are less visible. But in the Netherlands specifically, they are a model, I think, of worth studying, not necessarily completely, you know, you can't exactly replicate it. But they were able to decarcerate significantly in that country, particularly and like closed many jails, you know what I mean? Use those jails for housing and all these other things across the country. And we're able to do that by some really deep investment in mental health services and drug prevention and drug support services. And so people, instead of getting incarcerated for crimes related to drug use or drug possession, they would then be supported through like rehab, or supported through things for their drug addictions or whatever the situation was. And they were consciously like not incarcerating people, to the point where they decarcerated so much that they were able to close several of their jails. But that is not a model for abolition necessarily, right? Like they still have police, they do still have incarceration, but they're prioritizing things a little differently.
Can I add that, so there have been a number of instances in the United States where police departments have been abolished at the local level, and law enforcement responsibilities have been taken over by sort of, you know, the jurisdiction that the municipality actually fell within, right? So that's not that unusual. That's not what we're talking about. Camden, New Jersey, at 7, 8 years ago, actually abolished and then reconstituted their police department because it was just so absolutely broken that as the institution couldn't be fixed. So you had to reconstitute it. And again, I understand that's not really what we're talking about. Part of the reason you see a lot of examples of parts of the system being abolished, or different approaches to, conflict resolution, or, sort of people or conflict resolution and other kinds of community to deal with criminal behavior. There are a lot of examples of that in individual places. The reason you haven't seen anything as substantive as the virtual abolishment of a police department is that, as PG has said, and I've said, policing is not a discrete issue, right? It implicates every other element of our society. And so unless you begin taking on all of those things at once, with an eye toward the impact on law enforcement, it's really kind of difficult to do. Law enforcement is also the ultimate local issue, right? So I think you can see bits and pieces of what's necessary to reach that abolitionist state, but we don't actually have a really good example of it in its total complexity just yet.
Good. So we had a question from the audience that was suggestive of some of the difficulties of balancing, because part of our state education budget is, or education budget is state, there's federal funds coming in, there's local funds. And I guess one answer is that you have to do it everywhere. But how do you start imagining or talking to people about what it would mean in terms of city budgeting to start doing these balances, and a couple of maybe practical examples?
So I think Eric could speak more to like the complexity of the city budget and all the really insidious ways that they include the police across the budget without really naming that it's going to the police. And that I think and really clarifying that and uplifting the actual amount of money that goes into policing is the first really big part of the puzzle, is getting really clear on what actually is being spent. And then I think in terms of balancing, the way I've talked about it with folks, we've seen in other cities models of like participatory budgeting and wanting folks to be involved in like having some pot of money, like residents having some pot of money that they're able to vote on what it gets used for, and investing more in communities in that way. But yeah, I think we think about it as like in Detroit right now, the police are getting over $300 million. Over $300 million are going to policing. If we could even get 50 million of those dollars, right? Like thinking about like, what is just a piece of that? If we take away their tanks and their military equipment and get that money, right? Then what could we invest that in? We could invest it in schools. We could invest it in parks. We could invest it in healthcare. Like there are all these. So I don't think it's about balancing. And it's like, there's so much there that we could take in order to create more of a balance, right? But that's my initial reaction.
Great.
Another question from the audience is how we move forward with dramatically less police or even no police in situations of actual violent crimes. PG, you spoke to this, but could you elaborate? And Eric, obviously you can speak to this as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just say there's no easy answer for this. And I'm not trying to, and I don't think, I definitely don't, and I don't think abolition as a practice in general tries to make it seem like abolition is the easy way out, or that once we abolish the police, then we've solved all our problems, right? Like being very clear that the police are part of the problem. The police and policing in general and the way that we criminalize folks is part of what encourages violence to happen. Capitalism is part of what encourages violence to happen. Patriarchy is one of the things that encourages violence to happen. So there are all these other systems and beliefs and ways of being that we also have to undo in order to stop violent crimes from happening in our communities. If we're saying defund or abolish the police and then violent crimes still happen, there's so many folks, experts in the field, who are talking about transformative justice and restorative justice as models for how do we actually atone for and be responsible for the harm that we might cause to another person. Now, again, not an easy answer, right? Everybody, every restorative circle, every restorative justice process isn't just a kumbaya circle that we're like, oh, let's just talk about our feelings. And then once we talk about our feelings, then yes, we'll be good. We've resolved the conflict, right? Like, we know that there actually might need to be ways that folks are held accountable or atone, or there's some type of restitution for what they do. What we're saying is that that restitution shouldn't be punitive punishment. That restitution shouldn't be complete isolation. And that, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that there's a lot of work to be done to develop that out and like what that could look like. And there's a lot of dope folks who are already doing that type of thinking. But yeah, that's my initial thought on it.
So let me add this. A lot of times how you come at a question or how you come at an issue sort of determines how you evaluate what the answer is. A friend of mine once pointed out, I was party to a discussion where somebody said, the problem with public transit is it relies too heavily on public subsidies. And the other person in the discussion said, well, yeah, but so do roads, right? But we just don't think of the fact that we subsidize every street, right? We don't think about that. Similarly, when you start talking about what would we do if there were no police, right? Well, first, remember that we're talking about a society that's very different from ours because we've prioritized differently, right? So you're talking about a society where people grew up, where there were investment in children, and where mental health treatment was a priority, and where substance abuse was something that could be treated without having to lock someone up, right? So we're talking about initially about this taking place in a very different society that we're working toward. At least this is the way I think through it. And as PG said, there are lots of people who are thinking about very explicit ways, for example, to deal with violent crime. But where this question kind of differs from the way I think we should look at it is, we're assuming that there are no sort of ancillary harms arising from the way we do it now, right? You can't say, oh, well, you know, what are we going to do about violent crime? You're sort of ignoring the fact that what we're doing about violent crime right now, one, isn't successful, but two, has a lot of additional harms that it's inflicting, right? Not only in the way we think about people, but, you know, people who are being killed and not in addition to being killed or brutalized, just dehumanized every day by interactions with the police. So you have to sort of reframe in your head the question. Don't assume that where we are right now, just because it's where we are right now, just because it's the status quo, doesn't mean it should be the natural order of things.
So I think this will be the last question, and I encourage you to take two possibilities. You can answer the question directly, or you can think about what the question says about society in terms of its readiness to address the issue. And you can kind of figure out where along that spectrum is most helpful for our audience. But the question says in two of the last police shootings, citizens who were shot had guns, or at least police tried to show video of the citizens holding guns and pointing at the police. How should police respond when people point guns at them during an arrest?
The police should respond in the same way that they expect people to respond when they point guns at them, right? Not to shoot back. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know. Okay, anyways, I just so upset about the fact that these are people who are heavily armed. They have bulletproof vests on. There's multiple of them all around this person who's able to somehow, I think they should be able to tackle them or somehow disarm them, right? Like, there are ways that the police can be trained potentially. I don't believe in police training as a reform that'll work, but there are potentially ways that police could be trained in order to respond to that type of assumed harm, rather than shooting someone to kill. And I'll just say that in the case that we're justifying people dying because they pointed a gun, that to me shows that we are not yet ready to fully see people's humanity. If we're saying that they deserve to die because they pointed a gun, then we're saying that they didn't deserve to live in the first place. And that just doesn't feel fair or right. The police is a huge force. it is perfectly acceptable and well within everyone's right to be scared of them the moment that they advance towards them and to try to do something to protect themselves. The police are violent. So they didn't need a reason. They've shot people. We've seen them shoot people without reason, without cause, over and over again. And so the fact that we're allowing them to justify their shooting and their killing because this person had a gun or this person was a threat doesn't do anything but continue to legitimize the structure. And that, to me, is just not an acceptable thing to do.
So if I could sort of answer quickly, though, I think it would probably be safer if I didn't, right? When I was growing up, my father was a cop, like I said. And at one point, he worked undercover in narcotics. And I used to have nightmares about my father not coming home, right? Just like as a kid, it was absolutely horrible. I had nightmares about my father not coming home. And so you can't easily dismiss the legitimate concern of police officers. And I'll just say this, my son is interviewing to be a police officer in New Jersey, right? So you can't dismiss the concerns of people who, and I'll say a lot of whom join the police force because they care about their community and want to do something to make it better. And from their perspective, this makes it better. You can't dismiss that. And as PG said, we don't have all the answers. But what I do want to say is, we're not talking about, as with regard to abolition, we're not talking about doing this tomorrow. With regard to how do we expect police officers to respond now, I think we have to remember that sometimes it doesn't need to ever escalate to that point anyway. A lot of the issue that we have is police officers, as long as we have them, need to be better at de-escalating incidents, at handling people who are having, mental, emotional, or spiritual issues at that moment. But I certainly won't solve all the cases. And I don't think nothing anyone has proposed or that exists now addresses all of the instances. But I think what we have to do, as I said, is begin moving toward eliminating the vast majority of instances where this even arises. And, we're clearly not there yet. And none of us pretend we have all the answers, but that's where we are. But this is where we are.
We have time for one more question. And I ask that you keep your responses close to 30 seconds. Sorry for the brevity. But the question is, how do we as an educational institution support students who want to pursue careers in law enforcement?
Sure, 30 seconds. All right. I think we should focus on educating students about the proper role of law enforcement and understanding the humanity of the people that they are in fact going to be protecting and serving. You absolutely, if we should be dissuading students who come into this with a warrior mentality, who are interested in, sort of a punitive justice approach, we should be weeding out those students to the greatest degree possible by making them understand that their approach is really not what the society community wants or needs.
Yeah, I think that as much as possible, if folks are committed to going into law enforcement and wanting to study like criminal justice or something, like no one should come out of a program not understanding the racist history and implications of law enforcement as we know it. Like there should be no one who doesn't understand like why policing was created in the first place as slave patrols to respond to enslaved people escaping and ultimately just to protect capital and property, right? Like there are just ways that I think if more folks understood the racism that's implicit within the work, like despite good intentions, despite all of that, like if we can be really clear about the way that the system is set up in a completely racist way and just an unjust way, then there are ways that folks who go into it can potentially be going into it with an eye for radical transformation and not just like Eric said, a warrior mentality or like I'm going to go fix things in my community and like these people deserve this and that. So yeah, that's my initial response.
Great. And I might just add my own short response is maybe we should not have a Department of Criminal Justice or Criminology, but rather a Department of Public Safety. and start to change the way in which people think about law enforcement and broaden the range of opportunities that our students could have as they look for careers in the future. I want to say thank you. I know how busy you are. These are difficult times. So thank you, Eric Williams, for spending time with us. Thank you, PG Watkins, for spending time with us. Thank you, Ollie, for tolerating me as a co-moderator and taking this journey with me. Thanks for all of our back support, which you don't see but couldn't happen without them. We've just scratched the surface, and we've structured these events to have talkback sessions. So next Thursday, this very same time from 12 to 1, there'll be a talkback session on these themes that we've had here. Marquita Chambleys, our associate provost, will be there. We'll go into breakout rooms with facilitated discussion. We want you to internalize these lessons and have a chance to share your feelings, think about what it means, and you'll have that next week. So to learn more, go to go.wayne.edu/talkback2. That was a great plug. Anyway, thank you all and take care.